Welcome to the Leading by History podcast, where we're on a constant journey with our listeners, walking and talking our way through history and highlighting information which is most crucial for changing our world one episode at a time. Come along for the journey with your host, Dr. Masiyahu Israel. We look forward to you getting to know us better. Leading by History. Welcome back to another episode of the Leading by History podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Masiyahu Israel, back in our sixth season, season 6. I mean, we've been here moving towards 100 episodes with some of the most dynamic historians and educators. I mean, I'm just always excited and so glad to be back from the sabbatical to get this started again. Today, we've got a very special guest, Dr. Mary J. Isibor, and who we will call Dr. MJ. and just wanted to, welcome you to the Leading by History podcast, Dr. MJ, and just thank you for being with us. Welcome to Leading by History.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Yes. So, let's share with the audience a little bit. So I haven't really been on LinkedIn a lot over the last years of my career. But in the last year or so, I started to see the value in just connecting with people through LinkedIn. A lot of times I will just meet people at, conferences and sort of network at trainings. But I realize that there's a world literally of people that I will probably not be able to see physically that I can connect with virtually. And so you came up in my list of folks for suggestions. And when I started looking at your research and the work that you were doing, I was most impressed. And I love to see women scholars, African women scholars, and I just enjoy the work that you all do. It's always high quality, and I learn so much. And so I said, well, here's another scholar and a colleague, a connection that I can make and learn about this great work. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with our audience a little bit about yourself. You told me about your wonderful background and the mighty people that you descend from. If you can tell me a little bit about your personal life, where you're from, et cetera, and then bring us into how you got started in your current career.
Thank you very much for this question. My name is Dr. Mary. I'm a senior lecturer at Department of History and International Studies at the University of Benin. My journey into history did not begin in the lecture hall. It actually began in my home with the view of two women who shaped my entire being, my mother and my grandmother. And before I knew what research or scholarship meant, my mother was a teacher. She had this calm, patient way of helping people understand what it is to teach, and I even though the educational system wasn't so convenient, she poured herself into her students. So seeing her, I knew I wanted to teach too. So yeah, I knew I wanted to teach. So even with the challenges of the educational system back in Nigeria, she didn't give up. She poured herself into her students. So seeing her commitment, seeing her struggles, I was motivated. Then I also, my grandmother, she was an impeccable storyteller. She always put us together and she tell us stories. it wasn't the romantic stories, but she was telling us stories about our history, about our past, about the disruption of colonialism, about slavery,
Mm,
about our traditions, about our customs and all that. So, but even in the midst of those stories she was telling us, there was something missing. That the T is not crossed and the I is not dotted, and those questions stayed with me because I began to imagine that an African that she talked about having this kind of civilizations, being able to establish a sophisticated artistic innovations. Why is that Africa termed as uncivilized or underdeveloped
mm,
by our colonizers, right? So this question stayed with me for long, you know, and then I began to like, oh, okay, this I want answers to these questions, and I wasn't getting it. And apart from that, when this was happening, I was a very creative child when I was growing up. I could make shoes, I could make bags, I could make cosmetics from scratch. In fact, I could do very anything good with my hands. But I didn't know that this creativity was going to be a link or to my research about women entrepreneurs, right? So in the midst of all this, I was also shaped by the society where I came from. Yeah, I was shaped by my Edo people. I am from Edo. Yeah, then I'm from Benin, which is the Benin Kingdom. We are formerly known as the Edo people. We had one of the most sophisticated civilization in West Africa.
mm,
Yeah, we have one of the most sophisticated in West Africa. So the Edo people were known for um, how will I put it now? We had this structured political system. People known us basically for artistic innovations, but apart from that, the Edo was, as of that time before the colonial invasion, it was an empire, right? So being brought up in a situation like that, in a community like that, I think it's also impacted on my curiosity to know a lot of things. Yeah, it's also impacted on my curiosity to know a lot of things. So uh, that's also made me want to like these questions that I have been seeking answers to. How do I get answers to these questions? Because where I grew up from, they weren't understanding what was happening, right? They don't know the answers to these questions, and it also motivated me to want to do a research or maybe my curiosity actually. And then there came a moment for me to choose a university course, which also impacted on my research or my path. People expected me because I was an intelligent student, so they expected me to choose a path because in African settings, with the belief that when you choose a course, they call it a professional course. That's how they termed it. They want you to study medicine, they want you to study engineering, they want you to study law.
mm,
So if it's outside of these things,
mm,
they see it like, we are going to be wasting our money because you want you to study this kind of courses. At the end of the day, we are going to get back our financial stability and all that, right? But I chose history, and my parents, people around me began to ask me questions. Why history? Why don't you choose a professional course? As if history is a field that one cannot intentionally go to, right? But I chose history because I wanted questions, right? I wanted answers to questions that I have been having when I was growing up. I wanted answers to questions that why is a nation that had this kind of sophisticated civilization be termed underdeveloped?
mm,
And that path lead me to where I am today.
mm,
I wanted my research to interpret the missing narrative in African history. I wanted my research to interpret the missing narrative in African history. So if you put all this together, and then I was talking about the society I came from, and I want to emphasize on the fact that in the pre-colonial period, the Benin women were very instrumental to the development of the kingdom. They were very
mm,
creative. Yeah, they were very creative. They led guilds, spirituality, they were there. They were even influential in political situations. So I think putting all these things together from where I came from my mother's passion of teaching, from my grandmother's storytelling, the fact that I was curious to know answers to the missing link in African history. And I think it was just natural that I find my part here, you know. I went to my first degree. I did this. In fact, my first, second, and my third degree, I did them in Nigeria, and I chose history in all of this.
Mm, mm.
Yeah,
Well,
because
go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, no, that, yeah, yeah, that's how I found my path here. Like it was just natural that I'm here because in history, it's not just about curiosity. It's beyond studying the history of the past, right? So it's like you need to study history with not just curiosity but humility and be able to
Yes.
tell the truth. To tell the truth and to interpret the fact the way it is.
Mm. Well, you're talking my kind of talk. I heard you talk about how um, this powerful kingdom of people and how this powerful part of the continent and even the continent collectively, how it became underdeveloped. You made me think about Walter Rodney, how Europe underdeveloped
Latin
Africa,
America. Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
and it's you're bringing me back to so many thoughts and ideas. Um, when we think about these great kingdoms, Mali, Songhai,
yeah.
right? Ghana, these great, West African kingdoms that we hear about, the Idu people and, um, the wonderful civilizations. I think about Timbuktu, and one of the world's earliest universities, and how today there are still families that are protecting the libraries and the resources still today. But how did our continent become so underdeveloped? There's a book by Herman called African Kings and Black Slaves, I think it's called, in which Herman talks about how the European powers initially addressed African rulers with great respect, honor, adulation, pomp, and circumstance. If they said, get on all fours, they get on all fours. If they said roll over, they roll over. These European monarchs and leaders addressed the African kings with respect and with honor prior to the onset of colonialism. But after the map was leaked, that showed the source of gold and wealth with Mansa Musa, right? Once Europeans got an idea of where the gold was, because we would do the silent trade. You drop off, leave, and then the next group would come and drop off, and then you'd have a
Mm.
middleman so that the groups never knew who was who.
Oh, yeah.
But once that map was revealed, and you see this man with this golden globe and this golden scepter and all of that, and how he makes this extensive travel across the Sahel, and he drops off so much gold in Egypt that he actually destroys the economy for years. Once Europeans knew where the source of this gold was, where the source of this wealth was in West Africa, there was a concerted effort to move in. And once colonialism became a part of things, what Herman notes is that they began to refer to African leaders not by their tribal nobility or their ethnic nobility, but they began to use the word black interchangeable with slave, so that whenever we thought about Africans, we would think about slaves. And I mean, and that in and of itself is a whole conversation, but we talk about this slow and steady process to denigrate the ideal of the African and the respect and honor of the African, the integrity of the African. And it was a slow and steady process that continued for hundreds of years. And some might argue that it's still going on
Mm.
today. And maybe we'll get to Ibrahim Traore. We'll see. But you're talking my talk now, and so I'm
Yeah.
excited about this. So tell us about the Harriet Tubman Institute of Africa, um, and let's just give me a little bit about that. And how did you become a part of that facility, that organization, that school?
Okay. Thank you for the question. The Aretoma Institute is a very special place for me. It's more than an academic center. It's a space built in the spirit of movement, of
Mm,
freedom, and of collective memory. The very things that Aretoma stood for.
mm,
When you walk into the institute, you immediately feel the weight and the dignity of Black history. Now
wow.
it brings together scholars, it brings together artists, it brings together researchers, community leaders, it brings together students and all those who are working to understand Africa and its global diaspora. Now, this space is not just about a scattered histories when it comes together, but it's about a connected history and connected stories. The Harriet Tubman Institute was established, for the legacies of Harriet Tubman, and then the space is anybody that is working on African history or the diaspora history. You can come in and you have archival documents. You have
Mm,
yeah, there are a lot of archival documents, and then there are a lot of exhibitions on African culture. Not just black, both black. How will I put it? Not just African, but even Black American. So it's a space that not like I said, it's not just an academic space. It's a space that is protecting the dignity and the identity of Blacks in the diaspora.
mm. That now you
Yeah.
see you're saying things now. I may have to take a trip to Canada.
Yeah, you have.
And yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And because that sounds like a powerhouse of activity that
It
I would
is.
love to be a part of.
It is a
Yeah.
powerhouse. It is a power. Especially
Oh.
you that you're working on Africa, it is a powerhouse.
Mm.
So yeah.
Let's talk
Then
about go ahead, go ahead, finish your
Oh,
thought.
sorry. I'm just looking at for someone like me whose work sits on the intersection of history, migration, gender, and entrepreneurship. The Aretoma Institute is a home where I've had grooming, academic grounding, and I've been able to access a lot of Africans and Blacks that are doing, the kind of work I'm interested in. So
Mm.
it's a beautiful place.
So let's talk a little bit about um, the diaspora and diasporan history and its importance for Africans at home and abroad. What are the things that are important to focus on when we're dealing with diasporic scholarship? Um, you know, Tell me a little bit about this.
Yeah, thank you very much. Being having experienced two worlds from Africa, and now in North America. But diaspora history is essential because it explains so much about who we are, whether we are in the continent or living in the diaspora. And it helps us understand displacement, why people left, how they survived, how they rebuilt identities in places that were often hostile to their existence. It reminds us that African story is not limited to the continent. African identity has been shaped in Brazil, in the Caribbean, in the United States, in Europe, in Canada, everywhere Africans have found themselves. So
Yes.
diaspora history restores dignity because for
Mm,
centuries, these communities were described only through the lens of enslavement or struggle, like you said in the beginning. So, but when you look closely, you see creativity, you see faith, you see network, you see communities that resisted enclosure, right? You see communities that do not want to be, how will I put it? In the midst of displacement, they still want to protect their identity. So diaspora history is a bridge. It connects Africans at home and Africans abroad. It helps us recognize that even though our routes are different, our roots meet at the same place. So if you is a connection or is a bridge between Africans that are back home and those in the diaspora. So having experienced two worlds, I it gives me a sense of identity to understand the struggles, the how would I put it, the struggle of displacement and trying to understand or reinvent yourself in a strange environment.
Mm. So, um, how has your own history informed your scholarship?
Well, my work centers on African and Black women, especially women entrepreneurs and knowledge keepers. I told you in the beginning when I was explaining about myself that the home where I grew up from, my background, my scholarship, like I live my scholarship. When I mean
Mm.
I live what I research.
Okay.
I try to look at the everyday experiences of women that people tend to overlook. Right now they may be doing things. I'm basically focused on women that do ordinary things. The thing that you look at the things that they do ordinary outside, but they are shaping identities. They are struggling for survival. They are creating economies, they are creating development, they are contributing to community development. And so these works need to be documented with care, because we talk in African history, we focus more on the colonial disruptions and the pre-colonial societies and everything that happened before colonialism and even what happened during colonialism. But then we tend to kind of overlook the activities of everyday woman, because today, if you tomorrow, like how will I put it now? Every day is history, right? Yeah, and then you need to document things that we know. We talked about things that are significant, but we also have to look at the activities of these ordinary women. So I live my scholarship. So everything that happened around me, there are questions that shaped my scholarship.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it's powerful to walk um, the walk of the things that we talk. When you look at the African diaspora, do you see a single story or do you see multiple overlapping stories? And how do you navigate these narratives in your work?
Well, there is no a single story to diaspora history or diaspora study. There are multiple stories. There are stories of forced migration. There are stories of voluntary migration. There are stories of those that left with economic through economic integration. There are stories of those that went for educational pathways. There are stories of those of refugee, right? But in all of these stories, what I see is that there's a link of creativity, of reinvention, of identity, and of hope.
Mm.
Like you asked a question previously, like how did I come to being the director of my institute? I reached out to there's a professor here. She's in gender. Her name is Dr. Bianca. She's in gender studies in York University here. I reached out to her because our research aligned with my work.
Mm.
And because of my kind of work, I'm looking at women in like women entrepreneurs in the diaspora. So I wanted to see. I already have the perspective of those in Africa because I've done the research in Africa, and I wanted to compare what it is like outside Africa continent. If I'm talking about women in the diaspora, I cannot just focus on those back home. I have to also look at the activities of those in the diaspora. And that's why I came to
Right.
find out that a lot of ways they came in, like I was explaining before, some came through forced migration, some came through displacement, some came voluntary, right? And some came through educational pathway. But them arriving in the diaspora, the fact that they are able to how will I put it? They are able to um reinvent their identities and to create an opportunities that is contributing to Blacks or African diasporic experience. I focus basically on that.
Mm. Well, we we're gonna continue with this conversation. For those that are going to be listening by um, the podcast audio, you'll be coming up on a break, and then we will return right after. So as we uh, continue our conversation, I want to talk about the differences, potential differences between African and American Black scholarship. Do you see any differences between the two? Is the
Yeah,
schooling of those? Yeah, expand on that a little bit.
yeah. There are big difference between African scholarship and African American scholarship. African scholarship often looks backward into pre-colonial histories, into indigenous knowledge system, and the structural disruption of colonialism. That's what most African studies focused on. And then
Okay.
the African American scholarship often looks at consequences of enslavement, segregation, racial capitalism, and institutional injustice. Now,
Okay.
both perspectives are valid, both are very powerful, and together they offer a more complete understanding of Black history as a global experience. So
Mm,
you can, if you're talking about the African Americans story, you must mention the African.
right.
So
Right.
you can't take one out of the other. So there's a way they always complement each other. So together they bring a beautiful story about the black experience in the diaspora.
Yes. Yes. Um, so when we examine Black scholarship, Africana scholarship here in America, we see it as the foundation for teaching history in its totality. It is the one area of scholarship in the American system of things that takes into account gender, that takes into account, um, age, geography, location. It takes into account enslavement, but issues of greater injustice that is found with Black people around uh, the world. Slavery, a greater injustice, colonialism, a greater injustice. So when we talk about Africana scholarship or Black scholarship in America, we see it as the foundational study that involves all people. Women are able to be empowered through Black scholarship. Um, you know, Folks from varied communities find strength in Black scholarship. The foundations, I would dare say, for what we see in queer scholarship today is rooted in the ideas of Black scholarship. Our scholars have always focused on telling a story that included the voices of the many. And so when we think about the great works of African history, as I was talking to you prior to the recording, you know, we hold in the Black community in America with high regard, people like Runoko Rashidi, Dr. John Henry Clark, Professor Ivan Van Sertima. These are people that, and then from over on the continent, Cheikh Anta Diop, these are the people that informed much of the work here in the United States. But it was always about addressing injustice, educating the masses, lifting the woman, and it is a part of Black scholarship. A nation can rise no higher than its women, as it has been said. So, when we talk about African scholarship, on the continent and you talk about this looking backwards of colonialism and things of that nature, um, you know, did you all on the continent appreciate, and excuse my ignorance, but did you all on the continent appreciate the scholarship of people like Sheikh Anta Diop in the same way that it seems like he was appreciated here? Or was,
Yeah, we do.
okay, okay, because these are names that when I was coming up as a young man, we
Mhm.
held in high regard. I mean, when he was challenging scholars on the racial characteristics of the ancient Egyptians, I mean, today people have attempted to poke holes in his research, and to say that he arrived at some premature conclusions and that he had inaccuracies, but at the end of the day, the man was a polyglot. He was, someone who was trained in several disciplines. He dedicated his life to research and study. There's no way that I can talk as a black historian in America without realizing that I stand on the shoulders of men, like Sheikh Anta Diop, regardless of what folks today say about his research. He opened the eyes of many of
Exactly.
us to begin to even do a deeper work, right? So, black scholarship in America, we've always honored the African, right? And we don't see ourselves as separate in that regard, but as a part of it, right?
Yeah.
I'm a descendant of African Jews out of Ghana, and
Oh, wow.
but in that we are Africans. We see
Yeah.
ourselves as Africans in America. And so many times we'll say American African, because we want to ensure that people understand that African identity is central. So, that's just really important to me to just sort of understand how you all see things on the continent. Are there any black scholars that you all appreciate from the Americas that you've studied? Anybody that stands out, or does most of your research is it rooted in African scholarship? And if so, give us some names there too.
Oh, we looked at um, how will I put it? We talked about, but I'm gonna talk something about the recent time.
Hmm.
Um, you know Professor Saheed Aderunto. He's
I've heard and am familiar with. I think I've seen a couple of lectures on
Yeah,
you, yeah,
he's
online.
he's based in America, but he grew
Hmm.
up in Africa, and he's doing a beautiful work on African history. He's doing a
Mm.
beautiful work on even though he's focused on the way he's interpreting the history. We have various ways where we study history, and his form of interpreting history is bringing in storytelling.
Mm.
Now, like a digital for the storytelling, actually, where you film a particular history of a people. He will film it, and right now we are in a digital age that people are so concerned about their phones. A lot of people don't even want to read when it comes to books. They want to
Yes.
see what happened. And so he's telling the story of the past in a digital way, and so he's capturing a
Mm.
lot of students in school.
Mm.
People are interested. They want to. They just want you to tell them what's happening. They don't want to read about it.
Yes.
Yeah, so he brought a way where he could he could film, he could do something like a movie or like a documentation, like a
Right.
documentary about the past that would capture the audience of people to understand what has happened in the past. And
Okay.
I think that is something that we should be celebrating and embracing, because it's another way of using history to talk about the past.
W- w- Um, how do global movements like Afrocentric education, Pan-Africanism, how are they shaping the modern African identity? When I ask you about, American African scholars, Black scholarship, etc., um, you know, these ideas of Pan-Africanism, Afrocentricity, they're rooted in the American African community. Um, not saying that those ideas and concepts didn't exist in the continent. What I mean is we popularized that by, having people as far back as W.B. Du Bois, right? People say Du Bois, but he said he wants to be clear, Du Bois, right? But W.B. Du Bois, in his Pan African movement, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and Black nationalism, these things really created a storm in the Americas and in the Caribbean about awakening all of us to to the history of Africa. I just wonder how have these global movements that have their origin by name,
Yeah.
particularly in the American African context, how are they influencing the lives and the identity and the education of the African on the continent?
Yeah, that's a very beautiful question because, like I talked about the age that we are living in. I'll give an example, a beautiful example. The recent reparation and restitution movement. Yeah, it was
Hmm.
a movement that happened that scholars outside the African continent were pushing for. You know, it's I talked about the Benin bronzes. I'm going to use that as a significant example to talk about how this global movement is affecting or is impacting on scholarship across the globe. So Professor Hanks was the one that started the movement for the reparation and restitution of artwork to be brought back to the original owners. Now,
Right.
in 1897, during the British invasion of the Benin Kingdom, when they came, they were surprised to see that the Benin artwork was so sophisticated that they were amazed that how is it possible that this kind of people could be able to craft this kind of artwork, right? So in that invasion, over 5,000 artwork of the Benin were carted away into European American museums,
Hmm.
right? So the identity of this artwork to the Benin Kingdom was very significant because as at then, it was used as a ritual purpose in the Benin Kingdom. These artworks were made from brass, they were made from ivory, they were made from wood, they were made from terracotta, and they were made from iron and bronze. So the reason why these things were done is that apart from the fact that it was for ritual purposes, it was also made for ceremonial purposes, and then it was made to document the history of the people. So when this invasion came and these things were taken away, there was a destruction to the identity and the culture of the Benin people. Now, for over how many years, for more than how many decades, these things were kept in the Museum of Americans and Europe, close to 20 countries in the world. Now, the recent restitution movement is not glamouring for the fact that these things should be returned back to the original owner. They should be in possession of these artworks. And the good thing about this is that because of this digital activism of the people, like we have been explaining, emphasizing on some of these artwork have recently been returned to the Benin people, and they are not given the right to to have a digital digitalize this bronze that people can easily access it, but they will be in charge. I will be the custodian of this artwork, even though a lot of them are still not be returned. But the fact that this movement has created, yeah, this movement has impacted on the fact that even a little of it is being returned to the Benin Kingdom is something to celebrate.
Yes. Hmm. Hmm.
So
For
digital
sure.
activism, yeah, it's something. Digital activism is actually impacting positively on global scholarship.
Mm. So, um, you know, I want to talk a little bit before we, uh, close out for today. I want to talk about what you feel that there is a strong enough connection between Black scholars in the Americas and African scholars on the continent. Do you feel like the regular engagement between the two sides is is normative, or is it something that we need to push for the normalcy of?
Well, I don't really think that is normal, right? I don't think the relationship is I think there's need for more strong relationship between the scholars in African and the scholars in America, because I know that there are kind of some disadvantage, because when you school in Africa, the opportunity for you to how will I put it? There are not much opportunity for you to have a contact um, with scholars or scholars in America. But now, like we talk about digitalization, you got me through LinkedIn and we are collaborating, right? So a lot of people now are getting connection to scholars outside the country via this digital platform. But
Mhm.
still, I think a lot of things still need to be done. Because the only time we can say that they really have this kind of strong connection is when they get opportunity to leave the continent to study outside the continent, right? But we
Mm.
are talking presently at those that are still in the continent. So I think there's still room for normalcy. There's still room for more collaborations, right? There's still room for Africans in the diaspora not to forget their roots where they came from. So continue to support, even if at all they're promoting their scholarship in the diaspora, there's still need for us to collaborate with Africans back home.
And there's this idea, and I don't want to open up the proverbial can of worms at the end of the programming, but there is a belief amongst the amongst the general population, right? The lay folks, if you will, that are not in the halls of the academy, that there are these culture wars. I see them online all the time between continental Africans, Caribbeans, and Black Americans, right? Uh, Many times there are those that, are not engaged in the scholarship at the level that we may be, who have this belief that Africans don't respect us. Sorry about that. They have this the belief. I had a call coming in. I don't know if it came through and you heard it or not, but hopefully it didn't interrupt. But there's this belief that Africans on the continent don't honor or respect us here. That there's this belief, and I've heard it since I was young, that you all perceive the Africans in America as not being African, that you perceive us through the history of slavery and
Yeah.
only through the history of slavery. And then there is the belief amongst um, the lay folks in Africa that I've heard that are of the belief that uh, Black Americans believe that they are better somehow, and believe that Africa is not elevated to the level of the communities of Black people in America. They're both incorrect, grossly. But what have you heard concerning this? And maybe this is the reason why it's imperative for us to connect, you know, the diaspora a little bit more, right?
Yeah, I was talking something now about it is very difficult for scholars that schooled back in Africa to find their place in the global world.
Mm,
I don't know why that is. For example, somebody that did his or her PhD in Africa, you know, is very difficult. It's difficult, except the person has to go above the limits now to find a position in the global in the how will I put it, in the global world or in the global scholarship. There's always a perspective that when you school outside the African continent, the scholarship is more pronounced. You're
mm,
more you are more equipped. I don't know, but that's what I believe. Because
Hmm.
I'm here right now, right? And I didn't school in America. I schooled in Nigeria, and I'm here. And then for the kind of things I have put in for, I've lost a lot of opportunities because they believe that I did not school in North America.
Hmm. Hmm.
So this kind of things is affecting. I was continue to affect the relationship between blacks in America and Africa.
Hmm. We've gotta do our part then, right? And that's the beauty
Yeah,
of our conversation today
yeah,
is maybe we
yeah,
begin to introduce each other
yes.
to those of us, in our respective circles and introduce our work so that others can be a part of this collective that continues to grow. It's a shame when you think about how many years, you know, I mean, I think W.B. Du Bois was the first black man to get his PhD from Harvard, right? At a time where this was completely unthinkable, right?
Yeah.
And we it's it's like since then there has been a constant challenge to try to figure out the connection to Africa. I'm not sure if you are keenly aware of the history between Du Bois and Garvey, but even they were at odds many times in their perspectives on how to approach Pan-Africanism or Black nationalism and their relationship to the continent. I went to undergrad at Lincoln University in Oxford, Pennsylvania, and that was a Pan-African school all the way. The president was Nyar Sadarkasa at the time, and she introduced us to many African leaders, heads of state, scholars. I went to school with Nnamdi Azikwe's
Hmm.
grandchildren.
Wow.
And you know, the not only was there a connection with Nnamdi Azikwe, who comes out of Lincoln University and is connected to the university, but also when we talk about Nkrumah, right? That Nkrumah uh, uh, graduated from our university. So the school was created. It originally was called the Ashman Institute, and it was developed in order to prepare. It was a religious school in the beginning to prepare ministers, I believe Presbyterian. It's been a while since I've touched this history, to send them back to Africa in order to help and support communities in Africa. And over time, it changed from the Ashman Institute into Lincoln University, but we've always at that school had a connection to Africa. African leaders have been for decades upon decades. I mean, the school starts in 1854, and African leaders have been sending their children, grandchildren to that university. I went to school with so many princes and princesses and the children of chiefs and etc. Almost
So,
ridiculous. I
so,
mean,
what, so sorry to cut. What about the average African that cannot afford to send your children to that kind of school?
yeah, I mean I think that's where we have to really think about the original mission, which was sending people back to the continent to establish communities. I think maybe we'll come back and maybe you can bring a friend and I can bring a friend and we can have a little bit of a discussion here about what do we
Awesome.
need to
Oh, yeah.
do in
Yeah.
order to build centers of education and support each other. I do believe that it's so important for those in diaspora. I mean, I just want to make clear we here in the Americas, especially in the realm of scholarship and history, we were taught and groomed by our African professors, American African professors, our black scholars, to love Africa. Okay, that's been ingrained in our institutional hallways. The scholars that I've mentioned previously in our conversation, they taught us Africa was the center. They're the ones who told us that we needed to honor Mama Africa, right?
Yeah.
So I think maybe the more that we continue to share that information also with those on the continent, maybe they'll realize the great love and respect and honor that we have for Africa,
Yeah.
because that's how we're trained. That's how I was trained.
Mm.
Africa is the center of the world, literally, and therefore, it is the origin of civilization, and we have to honor the continent. So, I know that that may not be 100% within the American community of people, and there are black folk who studied at, predominantly white institutions that may have been trained differently. But those of us who come out of the HBCU world, we were trained to love Africa. And so, I mean, and that's why I wonder, like, how many of these names do your colleagues know when we mention black scholars and the people who taught us to love you? um, you know, how can we learn of scholars on your side that taught you to love us, right? And we need to make these connections. And if we can't find a historical space where that's been done, then we start doing it, and we
Yeah.
love each other and enjoy each other's scholarship and conversation. So I look forward to what we can continue to do to repair whatever has been broken because of the chains of colonialism. Because that's one of the things here. It's mythological, but we talk about this idea of the Willie Lynch syndrome, right? And we don't have any historical proof that that what we have today as the Willie Lynch letter was actually historically true, but it paints the idea in the mind that we were purposely put at odds with each other, because divide and conquer is the way in which those within other civilizations have been able to capture the hearts and minds of the African and use us against each other. And so in that letter, it talks about, putting the older ones against the younger ones, and putting the darker skinned ones against the lighter skinned ones, and the textures of hair and all of these things, and continue to drum up the differences. And I see that there are movements today, sadly, within the African American community that attempt to separate us here in America from Africans at home, and say we're not Africans, that we have our own culture here, and that
That's amazing.
Africans are not the same as us. But that's something that has in my lifetime, that wasn't the norm, but it's becoming more and more heard, especially in social media, and that's influencing a new generation of people. I wasn't raised that way. I was raised to honor Africa. We honor our fathers and our mothers, and our fathers and our mothers come from Africa, and we honor that. So I think we've got a lot of work to do, and we've got to fight against this idea of divide and conquer that's been placed in the minds of many, because we're one people. And the sooner that we realize those connections, the sooner we can really begin to change things. Before we end the show, I always ask our guests to give words of wisdom to our audience. Thinking about our conversation today, and thinking about the conversations that we hopefully will have in the future, what do you want people to walk away with from our talk today, from our time together? What would you challenge them to do with this information? What are the next steps?
Thank you so much. That's a beautiful questions. What I want the listeners to walk away is that I want them to understand that displacement didn't erase African identity. Displacement did not erase African identity. It transformed it. I want
Mm,
them to understand that it created new cultures, it created new memories, it created new communities, all rooted in survival and creativity. And today we have the chance to rebuild bridges that once felt impossible to restore. So I want them to understand that you cannot separate African American from African. We've always been a part of each other, and we always continue to be a part of each other.
mm.
So I don't understand where the belief came from that the Black Americans are separate from Africa. So you cannot talk about the diaspora history without the African. It has been there from generations. So I like you said, I don't think we should continue to have that notion or that belief that we are separate. You cannot separate diaspora history from Africa.
We are one
We are one people.
one aim, one
Yeah,
destiny.
one
Yeah.
destiny.
Yeah. In the words of Marcus Garvey. Well, I thank you, Dr. MJ, for being with us today, and I look forward to working with you, collaborating, learning more about what you do. And I thank you for coming on the show with us today to share some of that work, some of your thoughts, and to have diasporic conversation, right? And to get these proverbial ships floating back across the great waters through our communication once again. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And from leading by history, we always end by saying peace.
Thank you. Peace.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leading by History podcast. We enjoyed being with you today, and we look forward to being with you again soon. Remember, never accept any information on face value alone, but always keep a leveled head and go and investigate the sources. Leading by History. Peace.